hybrid meeting, both in person and virtual. The meeting links will be sent out about a day before, so expect those Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Before we get into the rest of the agenda, I just wanted to pause here and take a roster of who's planning on attending and whether you plan on attending in person or virtually.
Rachel?
I am likely to attend virtually.
Yeah, very likely.
Yeah.
I'm planning on being there in person, David.
This is Ward. I plan to be there in person.
John Doyle, I'll be there in person.
Remaining member in person, Riddle.
All right, excellent. Moving right along then to the decisions reached from the October 28th, 2021 meeting. This is the last full EOTC meeting that we had, and as a reminder, we did have 2 approvals from that meeting. The first one was the 2022 EOTC budget, and the second one was the 2022 EOTC work plan. As you all recall, we did amend the EOTC work plan a few weeks ago for 2022. These decisions reached do not reflect those conversations, so this is specific to that one meeting on October 28th. But if anyone has had the opportunity to read through those decisions reached, I can take any corrections at this time. But if you haven't had a chance yet, feel free to email me those corrections just before the meeting on March 24th. But I can just pause here and see if there are any corrections that you guys have picked up on.
Is it possible for you to enlarge the image that you're sharing?
I don't know. It's the EOTC budget, so it's approved. I threw it on there more as
I understand, but for a viewing public, I'm just wondering if you have the ability.
Yeah, I don't think that I do.
All right. For viewing members of the public, this budget is published, so it is available. If you're interested in actually reading it and seeing it, we can get that to you. So members of the public can get in touch with myself or someone here at City Hall. Any other questions or items? Not here, David.
Okay. Sorry, I can't really see you guys. Yeah, moving on then to the agenda items. The first one that we have coming up for next Thursday is the Brush Creek Park and Ride to AABC and Trail Connection. As you may recall, this is a partnership project that's 1/3 funded by Pickens County Open Space and Trails, which is also leading the project. It's 1/3 City of Aspen Parks and Open Space Department and 1/3 the EOTC. The review team to date includes staff from Pickens County Open Space and Trails, City of Aspen Parks and Open Space, Snowmass Parks and Recreation, and myself as the Transportation Administrator. The outcome from this effort is a feasibility study that was put together by SGM in both 2021 and early 2022. And the purpose of this feasibility study is to identify the technically feasible hard surface ADA accessible trail connections between the Brush Creek Park and Ride and the AABC. SGM will run through all the options that were identified as part of that feasibility study in terms of the alignment. And we will have staff there from the City Parks and Open Space and Pickens County Open Space and Trails to answer any of the trail-related questions. But in terms of the outcome from the EOTC next Thursday, what we're looking for is administrative direction to initiate the public process. So we're not looking for the EOTC to identify a preferred alignment alternative at that meeting or to allocate any funding for construction. What we're really looking for is that blessing saying, yes, move forward into the public process. Because at this point, we've only been looking for those technically feasible options. In terms of budget impacts, so you're aware, the EOTC did budget $25,000 in 2022 for this public outreach effort. And it's my understanding that Pickens County Open Space and Trails and the City of Aspen Parks and Open Space have also budgeted $25,000 each for a total of $75,000 to do this effort if the EOTC does give it the go-ahead. We want to pause there before we get into the requested access through the Brush Creek Park and Ride and see if there's any questions on this agenda item for next Thursday.
No questions here.
Okay. The second agenda item, this is the requested access through the Brush Creek Park and Ride. This is a request that's made by the developer, which is in this case the Aspen Jewish Congregation, or AJC. The proposed development is a 5,000 square foot worship center, lobby, kitchen, and restroom space, a 3,000 square foot Hebrew school, and restroom space, and 27,000 square feet of parking, or about 75 spaces, as well as a potential daycare. I think it's important when you're reviewing this and thinking about this item that the developer in this case, or at this point, is in their due diligence phase. So you as the EOTC is more or less sitting as sort of an owner's review in terms of the Brush Creek Park and Ride. So they're trying to identify whether they can have a reasonable expectation to obtain access through the Park and Ride as they move forward. But at this point, they do not have a site plan or any other further development plans. In terms of the review process going forward, I think there's also several considerations that need to keep in mind as well. The first one is that the City of Aspen, Town of Snowmass Village, Pickens County, and RAFTA are all signatories to a 2005 Management, Maintenance, and Use Plan, IGA. And how this reflects back on this effort is that any change to the Park and Ride is required to be approved by the signatories, so the three being EOTC members as well as RAFTA. The second consideration is that the City of Aspen and RAFTA do hold surface leases on this property that is owned by CDOT, and the developer will also need to obtain a CDOT access permit. So procedurally, the City of Aspen and RAFTA will need to submit to EOTC in order to obtain an approval or denial for access through the Park and Ride. That approval or denial, or approval with conditions by the EOTC and RAFTA, would then go back to CDOT as a part of their access review, access permit review onto Highway 82. I'll talk about that process here a little bit more in a second. But I do want to note as well that the EOTC, again, the developer is in due diligence, so they're coming to the EOTC trying to get your comments and thoughts, as well as staff's comments and thoughts on access through the Park and Ride. They have not submitted an application to Pickens County Community Development at this point, and that's for two reasons. One, again, they're trying to assess the viability. And number two, the Board of County Commissioners sits on both the EOTC and as the final approval body on the county side. So the EOTC needs to make a determination on access through the Park and Ride before this application becomes quasi-judicial once they submit an application to community development. Because at that point, the Board of County Commissioners can no longer engage on it on the EOTC side.
We have a couple questions. We have a couple questions here, I think.
Okay.
All right. Now's a good time.
Yeah, thank you. This is Rachel, and there we go. Thank you. This is Rachel, and I have a couple of kind of broader questions surrounding this, because I wonder if, as EOTC, we really can make that determination looking strictly at the intersection and the transit center. The larger property outside of this one, heading towards the turnoff down to Woody Creek, was originally purchased and thought that maybe that would be appropriate for housing or something like that, and later said no, it's outside the urban growth boundaries, it's in the highway corridor, it's inappropriate for really any development to go there. And that was purchased by, I think, city and county open space and trails in conjunction and made into open space. And the same in many ways with the Cozy Point Ranch, where it once was thought would be an ideal housing location. And even literally on the Park and Ride lot, people have said, can't we do housing right here, right next to transit? So, it's a little confusing. Think about it, and I would also say that I think the City of Aspen was very deliberate back when Highway 82 was 4-laned through Shale Bluffs. There was an opportunity to extend water service, and we chose not to be able to maintain the urban growth boundary and not see the mid-valley there explode with subdivisions. So it's a little concerning to me when I look, even taking off a land use hat or EOTC hat, but the size of facilities in the kitchen and these sort of things, when there's not going to be, it would be a well septic tank situation. The sand district doesn't go that way, and neither does municipal water. So, I really see some other things. And yet, at the same time, and without advice from our attorney or any attorney to the EOTC, there is, was it religious freedom of practice law, RULAPA or something? I'm not getting it right. But I do recall it was the one that the county was entangled with for quite a long time with Grace Church right at the edge of Pickens County, where they leave. They now have built a church, and it was several years worth of litigation over that the site had been purchased in a residential area, and was it going to be appropriate for, at that time, with some plans that looked a lot like a mega church, but it was settled through contract, and there is what I guess I'm trying to get at is there's a very large kind of federal bias or predetermination to allow religious facilities wherever religious facilities want to be. And so I kind of wonder whether if EOTC denied access, would that just put EOTC into a massive lawsuit? Or if EOTC said, this is fine, would we also get into a massive lawsuit from neighbors who said that this wasn't really consistent with the zoning, and we are what enabled it to happen? So I just have a lot of questions surrounding it and process more than any particular objection. But I would just note that it is something, development in a corridor that has been very deliberately not developed. And, just as an odd side note, I can't tell you how many times people at City Market have said, we just need to build a new City Market out at Brush Creek Intercept Lot because that's where there's room for it. And, I'm like, that's never going to happen. Creating an urban growth boundary and the type of zoning to protect the entrance corridor and the aspect were all very deliberately taken decisions. So I don't know where that puts us as EOTC in the year 2022.
In response to some of that, you hit on a lot of points there, Rachel. And I think in terms of the EOTC, it's important to think of this as it doesn't matter from the EOTC perspective what or who the development is. The question is, are we going to allow them to have access through there? And by allow, that is only to the extent that we, as the EOTC, would provide comments and feedbacks to CDOT as a part of their access control plan, or not access control plan, but access to Highway 82 permit. So it's not the EOTC necessarily saying yay or nay. It's the EOTC saying yay or nay to CDOT as leaseholders in terms of whether we would prefer or not to have access moving through the corridor or moving through the park and ride. On the RLUIPA piece, and this is my understanding, looks like Jim True might be on the line. He can probably fill in a lot more detail than I can. But it's my understanding that the county, as a religious institution, does not have the ability to deny this request at this time. They can condition it, but they can't deny it. And again, it's my understanding that CDOT, on the other hand, does not differentiate between religious and non-religious development. So CDOT does have the ability to deny an access permit to a religious institution, while Pickens County does not have the ability to deny a land use request for a religious institution. And again, I might be simplifying a lot of things there, but that's generally my understanding.
Yeah, and I guess the only last comment I'd make, because this is something that catches me a little off guard in looking at it, and I've certainly always been very supportive of the center here in town, and it's changed land use back in the day. But what reminds me of it a little bit is the Wildwood School going up Independence Pass, which was a very environmentally sensitive area. And so their commitment was that they would have a bus and shuttle people to and from their school. And so it gets harder to say access when it's like, well, is it 50 cars a day or is it 2 school buses? You know, I mean, what is it that it's access? And so that makes it a little hard, I think, for any of us to evaluate. But that would, you know, since you mentioned that there are conditions, that certainly is something that the Wildwood School had to obtain to consider its environment. Thank you.
Ward? Hey, David, it's Ward. I think the area that we're talking about that impacts the park and ride the most is the yellow dotted line on page, I think, 20 of your packet, 21 of our packet. And I want to know what kind of an impact that has on parking spaces. How many parking spaces does that access take away? Is that a permanent easement? I want to know basically what we're getting into if we approve this by decreasing the functionality of the park and ride and the capacity.
You're segueing into my next slide here, Will Ward. So in terms of the staff recommendation, staff believes that at this point, we do not have enough information to make design-specific comments back to the EOTC, and that the EOTC does not have enough information to approve or deny the access request at this time. So we fully agree. I think that on the staff side, we see all of those issues, and we're not prepared to make that recommendation at this point. So what we have coming before you next Thursday is a staff recommendation for administrative direction to utilize some staff proposed standards in order to review the development as we receive more information. So what these standards would do is basically give us a lens in order to craft that staff recommendation of approval, denial, or approval with conditions. So that does require that the developer comes back to the EOTC at a later date when they have more information. But when you are reviewing the staff recommendation, you'll notice that the proposed standards are not specific to this development. So they are developer neutral, if you will. And the thinking there was, sitting as the EOTC, we're not able to determine what happens land use-wise on adjacent property. So this is really geared toward identifying the items that we think are important to maintain a functioning park and ride based on commuter access and transit access to the extent that we can. So that's really what the staff recommendation is getting at.
Thank you, David.
John?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions about transportation as well, Dave, and I'm glad Rachel brought that up. The traffic count information you had, I thought, was really helpful. It showed that people are mostly coming and going to Aspen and to Snowmass Village. I noticed underneath your Hebrew school heading, it said the Hebrew school meet once a week during the educational school year, September to April, following a typical education school day. The generally elementary to middle school age students will be both bused or shuttled from the educational school system and driven by parents. So if I'm interpreting this correctly, people will be driving their kids from the public school campus out to this new campus, and that is, I don't know, during the early part of our rush hour. That's a concern for me. I'm wondering if, like Rachel pointed out with Wildwood School, if this does happen, if it could be written into the contract that they use shuttles.
So I believe that the traffic counts that you're referring to are in the study that was put together by SGM.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is a good question to ask the developer and the traffic engineer on the 24th in terms of how they determine that split. So we do know that they're generating enough traffic to require an access permit through CDOT, so that's a 20% increase in daily hourly volume. But again, these are some of the questions that we're looking for more answers to as well.
Thank you.
And to add on to that as well, there is one standard in there that specifically addresses transit and utilizing transit to help reduce traffic numbers.
Can I had a real small follow-up because John reminded me of something. And thank you for reminding me of it. You know, what also struck me when I read this is that there's been different times that the city has made concessions related to usage of Highway 82 to not try to clog up the entrance and the roundabout further. And particularly I'm thinking of snow hauling, which has really made it a little harder for us during some of these years, but we don't haul snow out to the snow dump site during the daylight hours because of the existing traffic levels on Highway 82. And I think that was part of the condition when we bought the snow dump site from the county. And again, it still has to do with how much traffic is in 82 and the entrance and the roundabout. So the transportation impacts to 82 are being measured a lot of times in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Dave, can you just give me a bit more? I saw AJC out there and I was like, what? Can you just give me a bit of the background? When did they purchase that property? Has this always been the plan for development? Have we been in the loop on that, or is this new to EOTC in general as well? They've been lying dormant for my 3 years. Like, it just really surprised me.
This has been, it's been kind of on and off from my perspective for about the last year. So we've, Dan Coakley at SGM contacted the EOTC staff early last spring. We thought that something was going to come in sooner, and then nothing came in. So they resurrected this about last November, I want to say. So it's pretty new. Again, it needs to go through the EOTC and CDOT before it gets to the county to start reviewing the land use piece. So this is kind of new on the scene. I'm not sure of their ownership status of the property, however.
Oh, okay. And I know that we don't really have a proposal to look at, so maybe the answer is just we don't know. But if we were just to deny this outright and they wanted to continue with the use of this property, would they just go around? Like, what would they do?
I think that they would reevaluate other options, but to be honest, I'm not so sure that they have that many options without access to the signal on Highway 82 and Brush Creek Road. So I think that this is a pretty important piece to them in order to make the development work.
Got it. Okay. I haven't talked to anyone over there, so this may be totally off base, but having been to a lot of Hebrew schools, I would just say as far as traffic volume, normally 1 day a week is the norm, some are 2 days a week, and yeah, there's sort of set times where you would come and leave as a class, but kids practicing for their bar bat mitzvahs, working on their haftarahs, getting additional, there's a lot of one-off transit kind of 7 days a week would be the expectation from all the Hebrew schools I've seen, if that's helpful.
We don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
You don't, I don't, and it's not something that I'm just asking the type of questions I would ask about any development, and especially in a corridor where it has been trying to preserve character and not have development. I mean, that was one of the first real actions of the Board of County Commissioners under Shellman, Edwards, and Kinsley was to downzone the highway corridor so we didn't have strip developments and malls the whole way up from the county line. And, that is currently a single-family home with a single driveway. A very, very long time ago, my first husband and I made a deal to fix the fences if we could keep our horses out there in the winter, and so we had done that. But that was quite a long time ago. And a prior owner, I think it was Mary Martin's husband, the colonel. And so that's really more of the challenge to me is the land use. It doesn't seem like an appropriate land use in that area. And it kind of sounds a little like the EOTC is the final decision maker because the county will not have ability to turn it down or not based on religious protection laws federally. And, I'm just kind of thinking of the single family home. It's one person in, one person out. They don't need additional access. This would be a zoning change that would inherently potentially greatly increase the property value to the seller by having a different access for more than just a single-family home. And I think that that's part of what this access really means. And it's potentially really increasing the sales value for that property owner. And it's kind of interesting that he didn't come to us or talk to EOTC to say, what if we could put up, some homes here or something? Or, it just was nothing. And so, that this access is it's almost like turning the property commercial.
Yeah.
Is AJC going to come to the meeting and present this and take questions, or?
I understand that I'm not sure if AJC themselves will be there, but they will certainly have representatives from their design team and SGM.
Okay.
David,
I do know that they plan on doing a short presentation then as well.
Okay.
David, could you please clarify what the approval from the Aspen City Council means, though? My understanding, it's not an endorsement, but rather it allows the application to go forward. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yeah, certainly. So the city of Aspen as a leaseholder on the property, so City of Aspen and Raft are the two leaseholders on the park and ride, will both be solicited for comment from CDOT as a part of their access permit approval process. And so the city or the CDOT will take the comments and suggestions from the City of Aspen and RAFTA into account when considering whether to approve or deny their access permit. So it's not so much that the EOTC is the approval entity, but we need to decide on what our feedback to CDOT will be. So yes, we think it's appropriate under X conditions, or no, we don't think it's appropriate. It's kind of the direction that we're going to, but that is just would be more or less a referral comment back to CDOT.
But this is Jim True. It's only a referral comment to CDOT. City Council, even as a leaseholder, doesn't have decision-making authority, does it?
It is my understanding, no. I mean, a lot of this rests on, honestly, how much weight CDOT places on the comments received from RAFTA and the City of Aspen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council, I just wanted to, so you were clear that really where the decision lies is not at your seat, that on this particular issue, and your comments either way, or both positive and negative, are all to be weighed by the CDOT staff in reviewing the access request. And so it's really independent of the type of use, is what I think both Jim and I would counsel you on, to not base your comments on the type of use, but rather on its impact to the operations of the transit center that you have put so much effort into making sure occurs there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Any other questions on this item? Yep, a couple more.
To reinforce what Sarah said, is that the staff recommendation is for proposed standards that are intended to get at the root of Sarah's comment.
Okay.
I guess I'm just a little confused now. Outside of this work session in the EOTC meeting, are we then developing council comments specifically to go to CDOT? And then there would be comments that are more from the joint body of EOTC as well? That's kind of what it sounded like.
Well, then that's
3 sets of comments.
3 sets of comments, okay. So from us individually as leaseholders.
From the city council, just to clarify the word individual, from the city council, from the EOTC, and from RAFTA.
Okay.
When the EOTC comments are put together, David, does the BOCC need to recuse itself from that because of the land use component then, or is it afterwards?
My understanding is the BOCC can be involved up until the point that a land use application is submitted to community development.
Okay, so all three jurisdictions would be involved in the comments on the EOTC.
So then, are we, as the city council, meeting at a separate time than this to come up with our formal comments with the help of ComDev?
It won't be with ComDev, it will be with the Transportation Department
Okay.
that occurs with, because we're looking at impacts to the transit center, not the land use itself. But we would administratively pull together some draft language for the council based on today's conversation of pros and cons, and essentially say, take these off, like have you direct us, take these things off, add these things. But the first step is really getting through, seeing if as a whole the EOTC is just against this, you know, and then do you want to operate independent of that joint position of the three governing bodies? There's a little bit of, we've never had to do this before, so we're sorting some of this out along the way, but I would anticipate that we would want the EOTC discussion first before, so you would be informed of those opinions before finalizing your comments.
That makes sense to me. The only thing that I struggle with a little bit is that as we constantly talk about, transportation and land use are connected. They're not separate things, and there is a land use history around this parcel. And so I'm wondering if that would be looked at all. That's the only reason I had thought of ComDev and deliberate decisions that have been made in the past.
Yeah, I don't know that we can fully answer that for you today.
Okay.
I think we need to have probably some legal advice on some jurisdictional boundaries.
Thank you.
Just clarifications here, the CDOT is the final authority?
CDOT controls all the access points on Highway 82, including this one.
So EOTC, City of Aspen, and RAFTA are all just advise to the CDOT?
Right, so with a typical access point application, you know, a parcel has some right to access. The question is the right to access this parcel currently has, is it sufficient for the type of alternative land use that may be getting proposed? And that's has a lot behind figuring that out. In this case, we have a potential buyer, I don't know which one it is, who's saying there might be a better way to better service their parcel and mitigate whatever impacts their traffic impact study said by putting that traffic through a traffic light instead of left-hand turns, is probably what the issue is from the traffic impact study. I don't know since I haven't read it, but that would be my instinct. That would be a place I would have caution given what we deal with already in that area.
I think it's important to keep in mind as well that the city of Aspen, town of Snowmass, Pickens County, and RAFTA are all parties to that 2005 IGA as well. That requires all of them to essentially approve a change in land use. So if we count this as a change in land use, or change of use, sorry, I shouldn't use the term land use, change in use at the park and ride, then it does require basically agreement of all of those entities.
You know, one last comment or question to throw in here is simply that there are, you know, I'm trying to recall, I think CDOT owns that park and ride lot, but we've paid for all the improvements in the roads and lighting, and we pay for the annual cleanup and maintenance and everything else. And it would seem that there should certainly be some cost to using the surface facilities and the asphalt treatment and everything else that we have to do to keep that thing running if an easement were to be granted. So that element hasn't been brought up or discussed yet at all, but there wouldn't be a Brush Creek Park and Ride lot without an awful lot of EOTC money having been spent developing it. So, you know, we need to have some equity in that circumstance should this go forward.
And that piece on cost, that is also one of the staff proposed standards. Also specifically addresses that we're looking for direction on next Thursday.
On what, David? Direction on what?
So next Thursday, we're looking for direction on standards in order to review additional information that comes in, and equity in terms of, financial impact to the park and ride lot is one of the standards that we're looking to utilize in order to make a recommendation to you once we get more information.
Yeah, and I would just suggest it's not future financial damage. It is the financial investment that allows it to exist. I mean, you're talking about using a platform that there's been tremendous public money put into to begin with.
David, do you feel like you need to hear any more there?
I think I'm good. I just want to make sure that it's what we're looking for next Thursday is clear on it from everybody.
I think so.
Right, this is not an up or down question on Thursday. It's about, do you want the staff time spent to utilize the staff time for proposed standards and review of any access request. So that is, we're just being pushed forward by this individual request to get those criteria developed.
Yeah, David, I think for me, I want to know what the impacts are for the operation and at the park and ride before I want to really move forward with staff time to further review it.
My interpretation of that is consistent with his staff recommendation. Yeah? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
All right, next item.
All right, next item. The next one, this is the EOTC retreat update. So real quickly on the retreat, this is still scheduled for April 28th, so the end of April next month. The time frame that we're looking for is 12:15 to 5. I would note here that on your calendars, the invite that you currently have is 2 to 6. We are now looking at a time frame from 12:15 to 5. If we get the go-ahead and this time frame sounds okay, after the meeting on March 24th, I'll send out an updated calendar invite to everybody. But I didn't want to send out a bunch of calendar changes because that tends to cause confusion. Looking at the day itself, we are looking at having an optional lunch from 12:15 to 1 and then retreat sessions from 1 to 5. The format that we're looking at is currently still a hybrid of in-person and virtual. I think that we've all been through a number of, I guess, varying successes in terms of hybrid retreats at this point over the last couple of years. And given where we are with COVID at this point, I would suggest that anybody who's willing and able to attend in person do so. I think that that'll provide that individual with a better experience and it'll help the group come out with a better outcome. We do have an in-person location identified. That's at the new Aspen City Hall at the Pearl Pass Room, just down the hall from where you guys are. And we do have a facilitator that's been hired, Mark Hollins. He's got extensive public administration experience in Colorado and Wyoming. I think he'll provide some good value added. In terms of the retreat goals, to cover these real quick, we do have 3 goals that have been identified. The first is to reestablish a baseline of understanding of the EOTC purpose, requirements, structure, funding, operations, and current project programming. The second is to take a deep dive into the outcomes from the Integrated Mobility System, or IMS. And then the third one is to identify and refine a long-term, meaning 11 plus years, transit-oriented conceptual direction based on the IMS recommendations. I will be sending out a pre-retreat packet in advance, similar to the retreat that we had back in 2019, so expect that in early to mid-April. And just to get you thinking about the feedback that we'll be looking for on March 24th is essentially a roster of attendance, and if you're attending, whether that would be in person or virtual, and then whether you plan to attend lunch. So I don't need to get that roster now, but just something to think about in advance of next Thursday. And that's everything I have.
Any questions or comments about the retreat? Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, David, for pulling this together and the work thus far. And it's probably going to be a lot to accomplish in 5 hours. My great concern is that the integrated mobility system study was very deliberately confined from looking at the entrance to Aspen as a component of how you manage traffic or how you manage congestion, and certainly not how you complete the BRT. And so this is just me, I realize that, but if that's the whole retreat agenda and is going to set the work for the next 11 years without discussing how the entrance will support transit orientation and transit or deal with our issues, it will not be a successful retreat to me. And I don't know how we begin that conversation. I understand there's different work that we're looking at as a city and how to integrate it. But again, if we're setting out and refining the next 11 plus years conceptual direction based on a study that would not look at the entrance, I just don't find it's going to be valuable for me. Others may. And I just don't know what else to say other than that, because the city is hopefully going to begin some of its work to let the public know what opportunities it has and what opportunities may well be lost should there, with the entrance. But I just don't see transportation work significantly going forward without that. And at other meetings outside of transportation, I hear that from members of the other boards as well, whose citizens are on the other side of the roundabout. So I just have to make that comment. Thank you.
David, I agree with Rachel that we have to at least bring this up at the retreat, the ETA. It's Aspen certainly and Pickens County certainly. But during the discussion, if we're going to be seriously looking at the entrance to Aspen, I think the EOTC should at least decide in the retreat if we're going to zoom in on that.
John?
I agree with Rachel and Ward. I think leaving the entrance to Aspen out is ignoring the elephant in the room. I am excited to see what long-term 11 years, what that plan looks like. Thanks.
Hey, Tori, if I could add, and look, I'd be happy to say I could see a second follow-up retreat, and if this is the preparation for something else that we all as a group can agree to a few months later or after that, then that's one thing. But if this is our retreat for the year, and we were not going to review these topics again until next March at another retreat, I think it would be lost opportunities. Thank you.
I can provide a little bit of, I don't want to interrupt anybody. Is everyone complete?
Go right ahead, David.
Okay. So I think that you all bring up an important point and one that we've been wrestling with. And what I would say is that the options that we're looking at in April are not mutually exclusive of the entrance to Aspen. So the entrance to Aspen can or cannot be developed with or without these options.
Hang on, David.
And what's that?
Try again, David.
How much did you lose?
No. Hang on one second.
Very effective miming.
Okay.
Peter, you enjoying this?
While Dave's working on that, I'm going to pinch hit, because he and I have had a lot of conversation about this, as well as with the county manager and the town of Snowmass Village manager. And what I'd say is I'd ask the council, do you have a position yet on entrance to Aspen, or what do you need from the other jurisdictions to inform your opinion? Because right now it's a pretty big thing to say we need to talk about the entrance to Aspen, and to put some structure around that conversation, we need some more guidance at the staff level to appropriately inform the facilitator. Because right now it's a little amorphous to me about what would be the outcome achieved from the discussion at the EOTC at this level, when we're just starting an educational campaign around just what is the record of decision. And so I appreciate you acknowledging, Rachel, that maybe we're off a few months in the timing. I would agree with you, as my view. that we need to first make sure everyone has clarity on what the record of decision says today, and then the conversation of, is that the right thing for our community going forward?
Yeah, no, again, for me, I don't want to blow this out of the water, but I definitely, and there's a lot of other work and important items for us as a group to discuss. But if this is the retreat for the year and there's not a follow-up, that would be challenging. You know, we need to see if there is as much common ground or not. You know, I understand where people are at. This could just blow up again into another unrestricted 4-lane struggle versus we got to have transit struggle, you know. But anyone who's out there on a daily basis knows it's not working and it needs to be fixed, and there needs to be some way to control our traffic growth. And I think part of what we're going to be talking about with the IMS study is some of the things of potential tolling the roads and how to toll the roads. And, you know, if we're going to be talking about those, I'd like to have it be all part of a real integrated system that's integrated with the roadway itself too, and the buses getting out of mixed traffic. And so this is where it's just hard for me to keep moving it forward, where it seems so very piecemeal and so very limited. And, you know, should this community all decide on something tomorrow, it'd probably be 10 years before you turn a shovel of dirt, you know, getting the money and getting the supplies, getting the engineering, everything like that actually done. And I think it's something that really shouldn't wait that long.
I think the IMS really has a lot of means, a lot of ways of getting to it. But for me, the goal is to decrease traffic in town, decrease the number of cars that are coming into town. And as a way of doing that, I see increased utilization of the Brush Creek Park and Ride as a way to intercept cars before they come into town. But the pedestrian safety and the number of cars in town and neighborhoods complaining about the traffic volumes in town, my goal is to decrease significantly, whether that's 20 or 30% or 50%, but setting a percentage of how many cars we want to intercept or get out of, stay from coming into town, and then using all the IMS and all the different means to achieve that. But for me, the goal is to decrease significantly the number of cars that come into town.
Skippy.
Yeah, just because you're asking for clarity. I mean, my feeling is I have a sort of another circle, and there's a Venn diagram with a little in the middle, but it's a different circle. For me, I'm interested in the entrance to Aspen solely as a tool, not as an end in and of itself. As an end in and of itself, I think, you know, the studies from back in the day show very little benefit for a lot of work and a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure. However, I think many of the problems that we're going to be facing over the next 10 years, evaporation or just disappearance of local business, community connection, places to intersect, can be very elegantly solved by making the entire downtown pedestrian. That's the place. And so that can only happen, in my mind, with a infrastructure solution that allows us to leave cars outside and bring people in reliable, free public transit. And so if those are being discussed together towards that end, then I'm interested. But if it's the entrance just as the entrance, then I think it's an expensive failure.
Okay. What's your suggestion here? We had something teed up for tomorrow to kick off this education program and the ETA, and it doesn't feel like we're going to be able to get to that tomorrow, but there's a timeliness to this discussion. I think Rachel's suggestion is along the lines of what Skippy was just talking about. It's a holistic view of it. It's not just one or the other. So as this was brought up, and I guess David and Sarah, I'm looking at the two of you, as this is brought up, just looking at the retreat goals and having the ETA as a part of that discussion, along with the work that we're trying to do and the meetings that we're trying to have and get clarity for community as well as council, what's next here? How are we going to have a real comprehensive discussion? Because what I'm hearing is that all of us feel like, especially on item 2, the IMS, relies on knowing kind of the status of the future highway infrastructure and roadway infrastructure. So how do we bring these things together?
Sure. So one of the things we're doing to try to save the time at the EOTC meetings is that the staff doing the educational efforts have already been invited to do work sessions with both the BOCC and Snowmass Village Town Council to try to ensure that all three entities have the same baseline information on the record of decision, and to start about if there's something to change about the entrance, right? It's still a question of if for some members of our community. What would be the desired outcome? Because your desires at the City of Aspen are probably different than at Snowmass Village. And trying to ensure that we reconcile the process for those discussions first before coming up to a decision of what to do, if anything, next. And that's why I think that on April 28th, I'd be a little hesitant that we are that far along in the education efforts, particularly looking at your work session schedule. It's probably going to be April 18th before we're able to come back to you with that discussion. So it's only 10 days before this that you would have that information. I personally like Rachel's idea about maybe it's a separate conversation later in the year as a way to tackle it. And that the goal perhaps at the retreat is to gain the commitment that there will be that second conversation around entrance to Aspen later this year amongst the three jurisdictions as perhaps a way to handle it. I'm open to other ideas because I'm just kind of doing this off the top of my head at the moment. But Pete, do you have anything you want to add? You can say no from there if you don't.
Okay.
Occasionally.
So unfortunately, I don't know if we have Dave Pesnicek back yet.
Oh.
Dave, will you check your mic?
I am here.
Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Do you have anything to add?
I would add that the conversation with the entrance to Aspen and the IMS, it's a process. It's not a one and done conversation. And I think that what you'll get out of the retreat in April, while it may not be focused on the IMS, the information and the perspective I think will be very valuable to you as you move through the year having the entrance to Aspen conversations that Sarah was laying out. Yeah. And that we're not gearing this so much toward this is our one retreat, check, we're done for the year. But the end goal is to get a read on what the EOTC thinks of some of the long-term ideas within the IMS and how we should proceed. What are our next steps? Is it another meeting? Is it something about the entrance to Aspen, and at what time frame are we looking at doing that? So this is iterative. I wouldn't look at this as being, like I said, a one and done retreat event.
Thanks, David. All right, last comments here, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm not quite sure how to ask this, but I think I can point it out. I think that we're dealing with some very changed circumstances in Aspen and in the Valley since the IMS study was done. Now, I'm not doubting that a lot of the transit measures and programs they recommend work or would work well, but what I really am talking about is the change in real estate valuations, the change in where our workforce is or isn't coming from, and the new type of traffic patterns created by short-term rentals. I'm just really not seeing the concept that people will take a shuttle from a Red Mountain residence to the Rio Grande parking garage, drive their own car, then take the shuttle to the Ruby Park, then take the shuttle up to Snowmass Village. And by having a brother here visiting who was very anxious to get first powder the other morning, drove him up to the top of Snowmass Village and came back on Owl Creek Road. And it was pretty darn crowded, and it was all the hotel luxury vehicles dropping their guests off who, and I think that the nature of our resort is changing in a way with people expending extreme amounts of money who don't feel that public transportation is necessarily for them. And so I am a little worried that some of the transportation and congestion, the 30% we want to reduce, is not the type of congestion, transportation demand that was created before the IMS study was done. I mean, we've seen property values over 25, 30% increase. We've seen loss of workforce housing that's massive. And we've seen the guests now taking their lodging from all sorts of locations that are not anywhere near transit or within the core. And so that's a little bit of a challenge I have, relying on the IMS study as a little bit of gospel when a lot of the circumstances have actually changed around us. Thank you. And is there a way to get a gauge of that in any way, shape, or form? And I think it'd be helpful. Thank you.
Just for clarity, the IMS study was completed less than a year ago. So that was the study completed by Fair and Peers. It is based on the 2017 5 tenants that were created by the Aspen Institute, but the actual analysis was completed less than a year ago.
Thanks, David. Okay. David, that's your last item?
Yep, I'm finished.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Guys, that is our agenda for this evening.
Mr. Mayor, just for clarity for the public, tomorrow's agenda, so 12 noon, special meeting in this room for consideration of Ordinance 6. 4 p.m. is a work session. Residential and growth policy discussion is the first item on your work session agenda. Your second item is council updates and board reports. And then at 6 p.m., you're scheduled for an executive session for legal and personnel. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, we're adjourned. See you guys all at noon. 1 second.